Shabbat Shalom, Good Yontif. This summer, on our way back from Israel, Debbie and I made a stopover in France to celebrate our 25th anniversary. We had... See what she thinks. We had an amazing time, biking the countryside, drinking red wine, not at the same time, stepping out of the pressure cooker of the year gone by and anticipating the blessings of the year ahead. Historically speaking, the highlight of the trip was our visit to Omaha Beach. This summer, as many of you know, marked the 80th anniversary of D-Day. June 6, 1944. My uncle, for whom I am named, landed on those beaches, and I had never visited. We toured the terrain, we learned of the battles that were waged, and honored the heroism of the Allied soldiers and the sacrifices that they made. Having taken it all in, we made our way up the bluff to the American Cemetery at Omaha Beach, which is breathtaking in its beauty and the pristine manner by which it is maintained. A cemetery, yes, but really a monument to the young souls who made the ultimate sacrifice in defense of liberty and freedom. To stand there staring at the sea of 10,000 crosses and over 150 stars of David, all the more so in a time such as ours, was an awe-inspiring experience. As our tour was winding down, Debbie and I excused ourselves from the group in order to visit one particular grave, that of First Lieutenant Nathan Baskind. I didn't expect the experience to move me as it did, but it was there as I recited the El Mala, the memorial prayer at Lieutenant Baskind's grave, that I knew what I wanted to share with you here this evening. Who was Lieutenant Nathan Baskind? Nathan Baskind was a Jew born in 1916 to immigrant parents from Belarus who grew up in the Squirrel Hill neighborhood of Pittsburgh, just blocks away from where Debbie was raised. Born into a working-class family, Baskind was employed in the family's wallpaper business when he was drafted in January of 1942 into the U.S. Army. Commissioned a second lieutenant, Baskind was assigned to the 899th Tank Destroyer Battalion. At 5 feet 5 inches, he was the perfect height to be in a tank. Having survived the June 6 Normandy landing on June 23rd, Baskind went ahead of his men to reconnoiter firing positions for his tank division. Baskind was ambushed, severely wounded, taken prisoner by the enemy, and he died in captivity shortly thereafter. Having perished in enemy hands, Baskind was listed as missing in action. His name, together with more than 1,500 others, was engraved on Omaha's Wall of the Missing. In actual fact, Baskind had been buried 7.5 miles away in the Marigny German War Cemetery, together with 52 other German SS soldiers. Let that data point sink in. A Jewish American soldier buried in a mass grave together with his Nazi captor and killers. And there our story sat for 79 years. And it would have remained if not for a series of events which would finally and forever change the fate of this long-dead soldier. In December of 2022, a genealogist from New Jersey was poking around the database of the Volksbund, the German war graves commissioned, when he happened to stumble onto Baskind's name. It struck him that Nathan Baskind was not a name one would expect in an SS cemetery. The genealogist did more poking around and discovered that Nathan Baskind was also a name listed on Omaha's Wall of the Missing. The genealogist made a call to Shalom Lamb, who runs a not-for-profit organization called Operation Benjamin. To make a long story short, Operation Benjamin performs the sacred task of identifying Jewish American war casualties mistakenly buried under the sign of the cross and replaces them with the Star of David. Proper burial is considered the highest mitzvah of our tradition, a kindness that can never be repaid. In caring for fallen American Jewish soldiers, Operation Benjamin takes this selfless mitzvah to a whole nother level. Over the years, I've been in touch with Lamb and his colleague, Rabbi J.J. Schachter, when they've needed an introduction to a Park Avenue synagogue descendant of a misinterred soldier. A living descendant must grant them permission to proceed in a case, and sometimes a rabbinic introduction is needed. World War I, World War II, Arlington, American cemeteries around the world, Lamb and Rabbi Schachter had thought that they had seen it all. But a Jewish kid buried in a Nazi mass grave under not one but 3 crosses, this was something they had never imagined. This was something they needed to do something about. So how to repatriate the remains of an American soldier from a German cemetery? First step, as noted, get permission from a living relative. Lamb reached out to Nathan's great niece, Samantha Baskind. Knowing the story of her late great uncle, Nate, Samantha readily gave Lamb permission to proceed. The Germans, at least initially, were far less cooperative. Disturbing the grave of 50-plus German soldiers in search of the remains of one American soldier was a bridge too far. It wasn't, incidentally, just the German authorities who hedged, but the rabbinic ones as well. They needed to be convinced that the proposed reinterment was kosher. Fortunately, Lamb is not one to take no for an answer. He found the rabbinic workaround, and then, by way of a back-channel introduction from the German ambassador to Israel, received permission to proceed from Dirk Bakken, a retired brigadier general in post-war German army and the head of the said Volksbund. In December of 2023, a team of French, German, and American anthropologists were assembled to exhume the German grave. Their work was neither clean nor easy. 79 years had passed. It was winter. The ground was either wet or frozen or both. It was a mass grave, and all the bones were commingled. 53 sets of bones multiplied by 206 bones in a human body, and they were looking for one Jew. Fortunately, Baskind wasn't just any Jew, he was a short Jew. A 5'5" Jew buried with a lot of very tall Germans. By way of skeletal analysis, amidst the over 10,000 bones, the anthropologists found 5 possible femur matches. DNA samples were sent by diplomatic pouch to Virginia to cross-check with the DNA from Baskind's great niece, and 5 weeks of agonizing waiting, finally, miraculously, lo and behold, a match. After 79 years, the remains of Lieutenant Baskind had been found. Mission accomplished, an indescribable sense of relief for Lamb, who immediately shared the redemptive news with Samantha. And on a certain level, our story could end there. But it's what happened next that I found to be the most moving part of all. Having removed Baskind's remains, it was time to refill the grave in Marigny and reinterm the bones of the SS soldiers. The crew began their work when the German authority in charge of the proceedings put a halt to them. 52 of his kinsmen were about to be reinterred. Lamb, insisted the German official, would you please honor them with a memorial service? Lamb froze. A memorial service? How does an American Israeli with 3 sons in the IDF eulogize dead Nazis? Lamb had to say something, and his next words came out slowly and cautiously. I'm happy, he began, that you lost the war. But each of you had wives, parents, and children. When the children of Israel crossed the sea to dry land and the pursuing Egyptians were swallowed up by the sea that closed on them, the Talmud explains that the angels began to sing in joy. God silenced their song. The Egyptians too, God explained, are my children. A song of joy has no place here. Lamb's eulogy continued. At our Seder tables as Jews, we remove drops of wine, knowing that our freedom came by way of the suffering of others. Each of you, Lamb said, staring at the heaps of Nazi remains, are those drops of wine. I commend your souls, he concluded, to the judgment of God. Shortly thereafter, on May 28th of this year, the German army formally handed over the remains of Lieutenant Baskind to the U.S. Army. Soon after that, on Friday afternoon, June 21st, an assemblage of Baskind's family, German officials, and invited guests gathered one last time in Marigny to pay their respects. In that same spot that Lamb had memorialized the fallen German soldiers just months prior, Arnie Schrader, the director of the German War Graves Commission, invited everyone to hold hands and welcome the Sabbath that Friday afternoon and sing Shalom Aleichem. To this day, nobody is quite sure how this German general, straight out of central casting, knew how to sing both the words and the melody of Shalom Aleichem. 2 days later, on Sunday, June 23rd, the 80th anniversary of Baskind's date of death, he was formally reinterred at Normandy with full military honors in a Jewish service and reunited with his ancestral faith under the Star of David, the marker of his people. Baskind was eulogized by Lamb, Rabbi Schachter, and his great niece, Samantha. But the most moving eulogy of all came from the aforementioned head of the German War Graves Commission, Brigadier General Dirk Bakken. At the end of his days, Bakken said, reflecting over Baskind's grave, and undoubtedly his national and perhaps personal history, when he stands before God in judgment, he hoped that this small gesture of bringing Nathan to his final resting place will be accounted to his favor. As had Lamb over the graves of long-dead Nazis, a decorated German general now eulogizing a Jewish American soldier. The day concluded by way of Samantha Baskind adding a bronze rosette to her great-uncle's name on Omaha's Wall of the Missing, as is a custom for soldiers whose remains are identified and recovered. Knowing what I knew, everything I've just shared with you, I understood that when Debbie and I visited Omaha Beach just a few weeks later, we too would pay our respects. The grass has since covered over the grave, and the Star of David stood proudly over it. I recited the memorial prayer, and my thoughts turned to young Nathan, his heroism, and how he and his fellow soldiers, my great-uncle included, must have been, how scared they were, storming the wet beaches of Normandy. The terror he experienced of being wounded, captured, and killed in captivity. I thought of the ultimate sacrifice he made on behalf of cause and country, and my obligation, both as an American and as a Jew, to remember both him and what he represented. I thought about Nate's parents, Abe and Lena, who, having arrived in the United States as immigrants in search of a better life, then had to send their son back to Europe to fight there, and then to receive notice that their son was missing in action, his fate unknown to their dying day. I placed a stone upon Nathan's Star of David, praying that his soul had finally ascended to heaven, not only in the embrace of God, but the embrace of his family, who could now, 80 years henceforth, be at peace. Intellectually, it makes no sense. Bones are just bones. But intellect has little to do with it, be it the bones of the biblical Joseph being reinterred with his people, or the monumental efforts made by Israel today to retrieve their living and their dead. So too Nathan. As Jews, we do not rest until our loved ones are brought back home. Focused as my thoughts were on Nathan, in that moment, I realized that my thoughts were not just on Nathan, nor for that matter were my thoughts just thoughts. They were prayers. I prayed for my nephew, presently serving in his tank unit in Gaza. I prayed for Rabbi Zuckerman's son, presently serving in his tank unit in Lebanon. I prayed for all of our young men and women fighting the battle of our time, a generational battle between good and evil, freedom and tyranny, young Jewish soldiers asked to put their lives at risk in defense of cause and country. I've been to Israel several times this past year, and I spent much of my summer there. Like many of you, I've visited the gutted kibbutzim down south. I visited the site of the Nova Festival massacre. I've met with displaced families, IDF servicemen, hostage families, and families of the bereaved. So many young lives taken in their prime and before their time. The acute pain compounded in the knowledge that it's located not just in the present, but it will cascade into the generations to come. I prayed for all our brave soldiers that they should win this war and come home safely from the front. I prayed that the bloodshed of Nathan's time and our time should come to a swift end. And on that warm summer day, in the midst of my prayer, I was struck by the most unexpected feeling, hope. I was comforted, of course, by the knowledge of Nathan being repatriated with his fellow servicemen and women under the symbol of his faith. But it was more than that. I was comforted by the thought that from the darkness of war, a greatest generation can emerge, and maybe, please God, will again for the generation of my nephew, of Rabbi Zuckerman's son, and so many others. Perhaps a greatest generation will arise from the other side, and together we can all break this horrific cycle of war. After all, who would have ever imagined 80 years ago that the descendants of sworn enemies would work together to return a single soldier to his brethren? That a rabbi would eulogize dead Nazis? That a German general would welcome Shabbat leading Shalom Aleichem hand in hand with Jews? Maybe the same can be true 80 years from now. Perhaps not in my lifetime or even my children's lifetime, but maybe in some distant time, hardened hearts will soften and will recognize that we're all God's children and we all deserve a place to call home, and the arc of history can bend towards peace. I was in a cemetery, but it was the first time in a long time that I felt the possibility of future promise. Hope that the horrors of our time need not last indefinitely. On more than one occasion since that July day, I've returned to my prayer at Baskind's grave, as I do today, for comfort and inspiration. And it would seem it's not just me. When I returned to the States, I thought that it would be appropriate to reach out to Lieutenant Baskind's great niece, that she would find comfort in knowing that a prayer had been recited by a rabbi at her great-uncle's grave. A quick Google search revealed that Samantha is a professor of history, Jewish history actually, that she also grew up in Pittsburgh, and wouldn't you know it, has written on the Rappaport sculptures that adorn our synagogue exterior and the Gottlieb windows that decorate our synagogue interior. Professor Baskind couldn't have been warmer in receiving my call. She shared with me her side of the experience, her time in Normandy, and her present research on the Confederate Jewish-American sculptor Moses Jacob Ezekiel. She has a thing, not surprisingly, for Jewish American soldiers. Samantha expressed gratitude for my interest in her Uncle Nate, going on to explain that moved as I was, it wasn't just me. In the weeks and now months since her uncle's reinternment, a Nate phenomenon, as she described it, has emerged. More than the grave of Teddy Roosevelt Jr., more than the Nyland brothers of Saving Private Ryan fame, Nate's grave has become the most frequented grave in all of Omaha Beach. Like visits to the Rebbe's grave, like that old movie, Field of Dreams, people are making the pilgrimage to visit her great-uncle's graves in numbers that have never been seen by the staff of Omaha's Battle Monuments Commission. All of which begs the question of why. What is it about Nate's story, I asked Samantha, that has drawn people in? Formidable as a presence as she is, Samantha answered my question with great modesty, not presuming to speak for the choices that other people make. For her, Samantha explained, the repatriation of Uncle Nate was personal. It brought a chapter of family history to a close. A generational scar, at least partially, had been healed. But the inspiration and message of Nate's story, Samantha continued, goes beyond Nate and beyond her family. This year has been an excruciating one, as excruciating as any of us have experienced in our lifetime, as Jews, as Jewish Americans, as Zionists, and as human beings. Our belief in God, our belief in the goodness of humanity has been tested. The front lines in Israel, the front lines in America, we are all weary. We're all feeling helpless, and we're feeling hopeless. Nate's story inspires not just because it's a needle in the haystack story. Nate's story inspires because so many people had to work together, go the extra mile, and look beyond their own personhood and see the bigger picture. So many people had to say yes when it would have been so much easier to say no. A virtuous domino effect, like the song at the end of the Passover Seder, except this one with a redemptive ending. Nate's story is a reminder not just of the possibility that intractable problems can be a thing of the past. Nate's story is an object lesson in this world that things don't just happen. They are made to happen when people make them happen, when people choose vision over vengeance, forgiveness over retribution, compassion over fear, and activism over inertia. That's when things happen, and that is when great things can happen. Samantha, I wasn't sure that you were going to show until about an hour ago. And I'm really, really glad that you came tonight. It's a great thing that you're here. Another stanza in a song still being written. Samantha, your great uncle's story proves Shakespeare wrong. The goodness that men do need not be interred with their bones. Nate's life, Nate's goodness, continues to give us hope to this day. In this dark hour, Nate reminds us that we can, if we so choose, step forward from darkness to light. Nate's story teaches us that it's by way of hope and human agency that enmity can give way to empathy, bitterness to benevolence, and cruelty to kindness. In welcoming you, Samantha, we welcome and honor the memory of Lieutenant Nathan Baskind, Noach ben Avraham, into this sanctuary, and into the hearts of, well, the tens of thousands of people who are watching right now. We remember him just as we remember all those who gave their lives and continue to give their lives in defense of the freedoms we hold dear. We pray that their souls find peace in the heavens. We pray that their families be comforted. We commit ourselves to honoring their sacrifices, just as we commit ourselves to taking agency for our world today. If, as tradition teaches, saving one life is akin to saving the world, then perhaps in remembering this one life, we will be reminded of the world it is that we are seeking to save. May the memory of Lieutenant Nathan Baskind, Noach ben Avraham, be for a blessing, and may each one of us do everything in our power to bring peace to this world. Good Yontif. Thank you for joining the Park Avenue Synagogue family. I hope you enjoyed the sermon. Please consider supporting our online community by scanning the QR code or by going to supportpas.org or by making a donation. Shalom and see you in Shul.